Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rory Francis, Executive Director of the Prince Edward Island BioAlliance, and it's my privilege to be the moderator for this second part of today's agenda, focused on a topic expanding into Europe, what's in it for PEI, and certainly a focus on CETA, the Canada-EU Trade Agreement. So this is a pretty important part of the conversation today, of course, with the pending approval of the CETA agreement. And I know one of our panelists is going to talk a bit more about the process to date and where we are with the actual CETA, when it's going to come into force and so on. We do know that negotiations were completed apparently in August, and a signing possibly later this month. But there's a ratification process, and there are some other steps that have to be completed before the impact of CETA actually reaches the business world. Of course, EU is historically a much smaller trading partner for Canada than the US, but this new agreement certainly has the potential to dramatically increase Canada-EU trade and create many new opportunities for Canadian businesses and Prince Edward Island businesses. So very timely topic for today's agenda. Questions, I guess, that we want to really focus on today are both in terms of, are we prepared? Are our companies here in Prince Edward Island and Canada prepared for the opportunity? We heard Peter Hall speak very well about many opportunities that are coming over the horizon for Canadian companies. And it kind of makes us wonder, are we really prepared for the opportunity? And these things do come in waves. So there's a wave coming, and as the metaphor goes, can we surf that wave successfully in the next few years? Where are the opportunities? How can companies prepare, and how can companies execute on those opportunities? So we're very privileged to have a panel here today that can help us answer some of these questions. And I want to quickly introduce the panelists, starting on my right, Victor Pfaff, Managing Director of Pfaff Export Marketing from the Netherlands. Next, we have Ryan Tremere, Sales Manager By the Water Shellfish, a company in Borden-Carleton, Prince Edward Island. Next, Butch Postma, Trade Commissioner, Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, based here in Prince Edward Island. And Cal Whitnell, Senior Director, Economic and Labor Research and Trade Negotiations for the Department of Innovation and Advanced Learning here for the province. So a wonderful panel who will have some very, I think, elucidating comments on the opportunities and how companies can navigate toward those new European opportunities that are emerging. A format today, we're going to try to make this a very interactive session. So we're going to start with each of the panelists giving us a brief introduction of who they are and kind of what their role is, particularly as it relates to the EU. And perhaps some comments just by way of introduction from each panelist on what they see as the opportunities in the European Union that are going to be opened up through the CETA agreement. We're then going to kick things off with a few questions that I have for the panel, but move fairly quickly into an open Q&A with the audience. So do prepare your questions for the panel. And then we'll come back with some more questions and some wrap-ups. So we've got an hour here, so lots of time to get your questions on the floor related to the Canada-EU trade agreement and how we in this part of the world can be successful with those opportunities. So we'll start off with those introductions. I'm going to start here on my right. And with Victor, perhaps you could introduce yourself and give us your opening thoughts.
Thank you very much, Rory. I run already for almost 25 years an export marketing consultancy, practical export marketing consultancy. We're hands-on export people with experience of exporting. I do it with a team of 7 persons close to Amsterdam in the Netherlands, maybe the gateway for the rest of Europe. And before that, I was working for the potato business, so I'm glad to be here in Prince Edward Island, because that was always a very well-known name for us, because here are growing a lot of potatoes. I've seen it, and it is that the fact that it's a big potato growing area here. In the almost 40 years that I worked as an export manager, I've seen the business changing. Well, first of all, from the telex to what it is now with internet, getting a much smaller world and much quicker. But I've also seen the EU growing from a small group of countries like the Benelux and Germany, and then came on board Italy, Spain, England, and over the last years the Eastern European countries. And it has become a very interesting area of 500 rich consumers. And when I've heard the interesting speech of Peter, he's talking about growth, 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 and that is of course what the economy is driving. But I am also thinking about expenditure, and when you see what we spend in Europe in general on food and agricultural products, because that is my specialism, food and agriculture, well, we spend of course per person much more than in China. And I am working also for other companies here on this side of the Atlantic Ocean, and then we have people from China and we have people from India, and I'm jealous. I see growth figures, and it's right, Europe is not the center of the world anymore, or it will change, but when I see export figures, true hard export figures, then I can imagine that China and India are not yet that far as the mature market like it is in Europe. So I see a lot of opportunities in this big market, and later this afternoon I will explain also that it is not one market, it is for customs one market, because once you're in with your product, you can drive around all the European area without any customs. We have a euro, but not in all countries. But there are enormous differences from the south to the north, from the east to the west. So do not consider Europe as the United States of Europe, different markets. Opportunities again because of the trade agreement. I've heard from my neighbor that he is paying 8% on import duties of the lobster. I had a discussion this morning about mussels, 27% import duties in the EU. Well, if that changes, then I see a lot of opportunities coming up for Canada, especially, and that's something that you have to realize, Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, because you're so near. It's only 4 hours flying, and by container, it's to Rotterdam, it's nothing. So I'm thinking, but I'm European driven. Why go to China the other way around through the Panama Canal, north over the ocean, and then coming somewhere in an enormous big country where you have to transport your product with all the risk? The mature European market could be also a very good option for you. So that's why I'm glad to be here. So that is my introduction. See me as a practical, again, expert on exporting to the European market.
Thanks very much, Victor. Ryan.
Thanks, Victor. I actually had the pleasure of working with Victor last year during a trade mission that PEI put on, and I'd like to say it was successful based on some of the connections and networking meetings that we had. We were able to increase our sales to Europe based on that last meeting. What we do is predominantly live lobster. How I see this initiative benefiting island companies, maybe not so much for the live lobster, but mussels, oysters is where there's more domestic production in Europe of mussels, oysters. Eliminating any cost will help drive PEI products into these markets. Having said that, I think it will also open new markets and perhaps increase existing markets. For instance, in the retail market, I could see if there was a 25-cent discount or cost reduction on live lobster, they're probably going to be more sold in the supermarkets. So it's the growth will come in a few ways because of this agreement, and it will affect each product differently. I can't see live lobster increasing twofold, but perhaps mussels would with that 27% duty, as Victor mentioned.
Thanks, Brian. Butch.
Well, thank you for inviting me to the panel. Most of you have heard of me before. So I am with the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development. And if I can give you any message at all, my job when the CETA agreement is signed will not change at all. And by that I mean that the job I do now, working one-on-one with clients, in the due diligence of whether that market should be there for them or not, will continue for me. And I'm not the only game in town. I do the biosector. So next month for the biosector in Atlantic Canada, I got a session on CE mark. So that's already there. If you want to do business in Europe, know what CE mark is about. I do biosector. Ag Food Canada do the food and fish sector. So I just want to let you know that there's a network out there. Trade Team PI, they're taking a mission into Europe. What a great opportunity. Is that a market for you? The comment I want to make, after the CETA agreement is signed, you still have to do your homework. You got to have, similar with NAFTA, you got to have FDA approval, et cetera, and things like that is going to be there for Europe as well. So what I'm there for you is to help you with the due diligence. Is that a market for you? Am I prepared for that market? What do I have to do to get into that market? So leverage my colleagues in the embassies around the world. Your taxpayer have already paid for them. Peter Hall was up here this morning. Peter Hall has an excellent network around the world as well. Ag Canada have an excellent network around the world. Take advantage of that. So you don't have to rely on Ottawa or the folks in Brussels. You have a network right here in PEI to help you with that due diligence and what it means for you and your bottom line. Thank you.
Thanks, Butch. Cal.
Thanks, Rory. Cal Whitnell with Innovation and Advanced Learning, responsible for trade negotiations with the province, both internal trade as well as international trade. And the CETA has been near and dear to my heart for the last five and a half years. I was actually sitting up here pretty much 1 year ago today, just prior to the announcement of the agreement in principle on the CETA, so appreciate the opportunity to come and sit on the panel again today. There is a reference document in your packages. It's a short presentation just outlining some of the outcomes, timelines, benefits, et cetera, of the CETA agreement. So I'm just going to touch on those, and I think that can help maybe set the stage for the remainder of the discussion today. In terms of where we're at, there was an agreement in principle announced last October, and every province and territory did provide a political signal at that time supporting the agreement. The following year, there are remaining technical discussions that were held, and in Ottawa, we were summoned, all the trade leads from each of the provinces and territories were summoned to Ottawa to receive the final package, which was announced on August 5th, to announce the conclusion of negotiations. The agreement has not come into force yet. There's still a process to go through. The final agreement will require, before final text is made public, et cetera, there will be a legal scrub, a legal review of the text, as well as translation into 23 languages, and that's anticipated to take approximately 2 years. So in terms of coming into force, we're looking at most likely spring of 2016 or potentially summer of 2016 before everything comes into force. In terms of where we're at, in terms of the process, all provinces and territories, as well as EU member states, have received the final agreement as it sits today. We're in the process of reviewing the agreement and going through our internal processes in terms of what they might. Each province may have a slightly different process that they do need to require to follow before we abide by the commitments and obligations of the agreement. The federal government will have to go through their ratification process, obviously the legal review, the translation, as well as it will have to sit in the federal House for 21 days prior to coming into force. And the EU is also going through their internal processes as well, which requires agreement from the EU Council as well as Parliament, the EU Parliament. Just a quick overview. Obviously, Canada has been extremely aggressive and ambitious in terms of their trade agenda recently and moving forward. Once the agreement with the EU comes into force, Canada will be the only country in the world that has a preferential or free trade agreement with the two largest economies in the world, that being the United States as well as the European Union. There's also negotiations currently ongoing with Japan and India, and there has been discussions and preliminary study done with China as well. So Canada's trade agenda, they realize the importance of trade within Canada. I know Peter Hall and both Pat talked about that early on, and obviously the federal government sees very ambitious trade agenda now and moving forward. In terms of the agreement itself, provinces and territories were brought to the table. It was actually the European Union requested of the federal government that provinces and territories sit and participate during the negotiations. There are several areas within the agreement that are under provincial jurisdiction, including government procurement, greater access to public contracts for European firms. So there's a number of areas under provincial jurisdiction and obviously a number of areas under federal jurisdiction. I know it's been alluded to, PEI and in terms of the EU specifically, the EU is PEI's second largest trading partner next to the United States. Right now the United States accounts for approximately 69% of total export market for PEI. The EU accounts is second in terms of about 10%. So it is a very important market, and it is going to be open up for further opportunities for all of you today and moving forward. In terms of the tariffs, and that's probably what a lot of you want to understand and what's going to happen on that front, fish and seafood exports or tariffs will be going to 0%. All fish and seafood tariffs will be going to 0%. I think Pat alluded to 95 to 96% will be 0% immediately upon entry into force. So you're looking at spring or summer of 2016. The remainder will go to 0% no later than 7 years. There's also aggressive tariff reduction on the agriculture side. About 94% will be immediately duty-free, and that'll jump to about 95% duty-free after about 7 years. And in terms of industrial products, so other manufacturing goods, could be in aerospace, bioscience, the remaining types of goods, industrial goods, they'll all be going to 0%, with the bulk of those, 99% going to 0% immediately, and the remainder going to 0% no later than 7 years. So there's definitely good news in terms of tariff reduction, in terms of the agreement itself. Specifically in terms of sectors, obviously agriculture, fish and seafood, and industrial will all benefit for PEI companies. And the presentation does go into a few details. Obviously, I can provide after the session any further information that you might require on specifics. But frozen French fries, potatoes, frozen blueberries will be going to 0% immediately. Fish and seafood, as I mentioned, the majority will be going to 0% immediately. Lobster and mussels will have a phase-out period of 3 and 5 and 7 years, respectively, but they will all be going to 0%. In terms of other agricultural products, there was a large access or quota provided at duty-free for beef and pork. Beef at 50,000 tons and pork at 75,000 tons, and that's going to be a Canadian number in terms of the quota allotment. In terms of supply managed industries, obviously very important for PEI and for Canada in general in terms of the supply managed industries. There will be some additional access granted for cheese, additional quota of 17,700 tons. We've been working very closely with ADL in terms of that number and what that might mean for them. ADL is very unique. Currently, they produce approximately 30 to 40% of Canada's feta. They've really specialized into some EU specialty cheeses, so we're working closely with them in terms of what that might mean for them moving forward. Processed food, there's definite gains there. in terms of the favorable rules of origin, so what confers what is a made in Canada product, and can they, and the rules have been set up in such a way to make sure that companies can take advantage of those preferential tariff rates and reductions. In terms of other benefits, government procurement would be another big one. There's going to be big gains in terms of access for those that are providing services. It could be construction or services or goods, and there's going to be public procurement opportunities. The EU opportunity is right now they have about $2.7 trillion in terms of procurement, public contracts available, so there'll be more access and better access to those for all Canadian companies. So that gives a bit of a brushstroke in terms of where we're at in terms of the negotiations. And as I said, it's approximately 2 years away in terms of entry into force, but there will be a process moving forward over the next 2 years in terms of what the provinces and territories have to do, in terms of what the federal government has to do, and in terms of what the EU, in terms of the EU Council and Parliament will have to do in terms of bringing this agreement into force. At the end, there are a few links to some key sources on the federal government site in terms of communications. It talks about benefits, what it might mean for companies and individuals within Canada. So look forward to the rest of the session today. Thanks.
Thanks, Cal. Excellent overview, and I know those details are really important for companies that are looking at these opportunities, because the devil is always in the details. Can everyone hear at the back? All our panelists okay? Are we a little low? Do we need to bump it up a bit? Okay, back there? Okay, thank you. So before we kind of get really excited, we've got some time here, apparently, but this opportunities sound great. Are there risks to the CETA not passing? Before we kind of get out spending money, and perhaps Cal and Victor can speak to this particularly. Will CETA pass in Europe? Is there a risk that it will not pass? And what are some of those factors? Some elections coming up. Could that slow this process down? Try to give companies a sense of how quickly should they leap if they're thinking about investing in European opportunities. So, Victor, do you want to start that?
No, because when it's about the agreement, we know that it's going to happen. Everybody's waiting for it, but I'm not the expert on that part about talking about risks. I see other risks, but that was not the question.
Cal?
Sure. In terms of risks, in terms of my discussions with some of the embassies, the EU embassies, I'd say that the risk is extremely low, if pretty much nil, that the agreement wouldn't be signed. In terms of when that might be signed, there will be a Canada-EU summit upcoming in September. I've heard either the 25th or 26th. There was potential that the signing of the agreement could take effect on that date. It sounds like it's going to be more of a political announcement at that time. But in terms of moving forward, you probably heard rumblings in the media around specific issues that Germany or some other EU member states may have with specific elements of the agreement. I would say that there is very low risk. In terms of moving forward, the EU Council, which is made up of heads of state or national ministers for the EU, they're the first ones that will have to agree to the CETA. So obviously all member states would be represented through the EU Council. Following that, the EU Parliament would have the opportunity to agree to it, and they must agree to it as well. There is a third phase to this in terms of whether the agreement is considered, at least from an EU perspective, a mixed agreement. Is there anything under member state jurisdiction or responsibility? The majority of the agreement, once those first two phases of agreement occur, the EU determines if it is considered a mixed agreement. And if it is, the member states would then go back and look at those issues, and they would have to go through and approve. The agreement could still go through as 90 to 95% of the agreement would not be under member state jurisdiction. So those elements that are not under member state jurisdiction, i.e. the 90 to 95%, could come into effect, and then you might be waiting on a few specific provisions within the agreement that might take effect at a later date after entry into force.
Okay, thanks, Cal. So the other risk factor is, I think, the European economy. Even though Peter gave us a pretty positive outlook, that's one informed view, but it's one view of what the European recovery is looking like, and it's certainly been slow. And if the U.S. economy is picking up even more quickly, then companies that are looking at increased export opportunities that maybe aren't in Europe now, let's see if the panel can make the case for why Europe. Why, if you're already kind of familiar with that U.S. market and see expanding opportunities there, should you turn and face Europe and really try to make some new marks in the European situation, given that the economy isn't recovering as fast as maybe one would like to see? So perhaps a few comments on the European economic situation. Do you think that's a risk, or is this the time to really start to take advantage of the European opportunity? So again, Victor, start with you.
Yeah, well, we have the crisis in Europe. Everybody is asking that when I am outside Europe, and yes, it's going slowly. And yes, a lot of things have to change. Governments have to change things, but it's going very slow. It's a mature market. And you can imagine when you have to raise the age of being retired from 65 to 67, like we did in the Netherlands. Well, that's not happening in all countries like in France, and this whole restructuring takes a lot of time, and that's why, yeah, our growth is 0.5%. At the other hand, when I, as a European, look at the European market, I see still that the expenditure on especially food and agricultural product, but also on other things like cars, is enormous high. I see, at one hand, full restaurants. I see people going into the holiday, but at the other hand, I also see food banks. I don't know whether you know what it is here in Canada. I see long lines standing in front of the food banks, and that's things that we have never seen. So yes, we are in a crisis. Spain with 25% unemployment for the young generation. That will affect, of course, a lot of things. But at the other hand, when I see Europe as a food market, it's still a big food market, a growing market. Look at fish. I see opportunities because there's enormous demand for fish because the market is growing. Look at our emerging markets, Poland, Czech Republic, basic countries, but these countries are growing with, for European circumstances, high growing figures. So yes, there are enormous good opportunities, and this crisis, yeah, I think it will remain that way. Maybe we were always too rich. It went always a little bit too easy for us in Europe, and we have to be ready for the coming 10 years with slow growth. But nevertheless, it's going well. But like Peter said, and he's right, economists want growth because growth is the driving motor of the economy, and that is missing. But don't see Europe as a loser part of the world. You are still doing 10% of your export, and there are enormous opportunities there. So I'm convinced that it is a good export market, and it remains a good export market. And not only for the future, but also the past. We are related to each other. We have the same type of culture. We have the same type of doing business with each other. We have the same history. Compare that with China. I have nothing against China because I'm doing business in China too. It's really booming there. But it's another world. It's much more difficult. And Europe, yeah, is much easier. So in spite of the crisis, we in the business, we never talk about crisis. We do business and the business is growing. Well, fine, that's it.
Right?
Yeah, just further to what Victor is saying, I think if you were to look at Europe and try to identify it as one market, it probably looks like a very risky market, but not all your products are going to fit Europe in general. Your products are going to fit one specific area or region of Europe. For instance, we do very well in Holland and Belgium. We do very poorly in Spain and Italy. It's just market preference. You have to tailor what you're doing to the specific region. So if I was to say, you know, what is the outlook for Poland in my company? Probably quite poor. But if I was to say specific countries, specific areas, you know, there's a lot of positives. there's product acceptance, or, you know, so that it is happening. And I think generally talking about Europe, you have to address your own needs, you have to specifically address each area, each region.
Thanks, Ryan. Butch, comment on?
It's interesting how business comes these days. You know, anytime I talk to a company, well, how'd you get that trade lead and whatever? And sure, it wasn't my doing. Canada has a real good name around the world. People around the world want to do business with Canadian companies. People want to have Canadian products as part of their value-added chain because it helps them be more competitive. So whether you like to do business in Europe or not, whether it's a pull or push thing, business will come your way because people within the seafood industry, who you're buying from in Canada, they talk to each other. Aerospace industry, where'd you get that part from? And whatever. So, you know, people will be knocking on your door, and I guess the only thing I have to say is, you know, be ready for that market because I think it will come your way.
Kel?
Sure. I guess from the perspective of the CETA agreement itself, the CETA agreement is really providing each of you with additional opportunity to diversify into the EU market. Obviously, it is already our second leading export market, so there's a lot of activity there already, but the agreement's going to open up additional opportunities for both existing exporters as well as new entrants into the market. So it's really providing you the opportunity, giving you something else in your kit bag in terms of lower tariffs, favorable and preferential treatment that other companies may not have from other countries.
Thanks, Kel. Before we go to the audience, another question, particularly for Victor and Ryan. So perhaps some first-time exporters to Europe in the audience that are thinking about taking that step, given the policy framework that's unfolding. There are 2 or 3 things that those companies need to do to prepare themselves. What would those be? Ryan, perhaps we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, first of all, you have to be export ready. You can't just say, I'm going to sell to Europe, and then you get the sale, and it turns out you can't ship there, you don't know how to get there. You have to have everything in order before you even approach the market. So from a fish and seafood perspective, you're going to have to be CFIA approved to ship to Europe. You have to be registered with the Catch Certificate program. It's becoming more common in Europe for traceability. So basically, they want to identify who caught that fish, the individual vessel. So every time we have a shipment going to Europe with lobster, we have to identify where it came from, when it was caught, and how it's going to get there. So those are very important that you can't, you know, you could ship your product there, but it's going to stay in customs for a long time. For live lobster, that would be a very bad thing because live lobster becomes dead lobster in about 24 hours. Another thing you have to do is Transport Canada has implemented new security mechanisms. You have to become a recognized shipper. Otherwise, you're paying extra money for each kilogram that they have to screen. That's basically your profit that they're taking just on the additional cost of screening your product. And further, with Butch's organization, the Trade Commissioners, I've found them very helpful. We are export ready, so we were able to ship to these countries, and getting the leads and appropriate contacts in these places wouldn't have been possible without, you know, using that help.
Thanks. Victor?
Yeah, and I like to stress also the fact that before you start exporting to Europe, you have to make some kind of a strategy. It doesn't have to be a study that thick, but like Ryan said, not all countries are the same, and that is very true. It's enormous differences. So you have to decide, do I want to go to the south of Europe? Yes, they are eating a lot of fish over there, but then you have to calculate with terms of payment of 60 days. They're not always that reliable, so you have to prepare the way that you are supplying them and the way that you get paid by letter of credit or insurance, or that's your own policy. But these are the things you have to decide. Do you go to the UK, which is easy for you because it's the same language, it's even more close, but then you have to realize you do business in pounds, and there's nothing against pounds, it's a very solid value, but once you're in the UK, you're only in the UK, you're not coming out, it's an island. Yeah, and there is no objection of doing business that, but you have to make selections. Do you go to Eastern Europe? Yeah, That's possible, but then you have to come with basic products. Do you go to the north, the Netherlands, where Ryan is doing his business, Belgium, which is a big importing port for fish, but that you're not the only one there. There are a lot of competitors. So strategy is number one. I've seen a lot of exporters coming to Europe, and well, they thought it is just one country, and they had 1 or 2 importers, which was enough for the whole of Europe. It's not true. Retail, for example, and I cannot stress this enough. If you take the big retailers, Auchan in France, you've heard about them. Super organization, but Auchan is only in France. Yeah, they're outside Europe investing, but they're not in the Netherlands. They're not in Germany. Take Rewe in Germany. It's a big organization. They're only in Germany. So these are also the things that you have to conquer every land, country by country. Languages. Don't expect that everybody is speaking English. Of the buyers, especially in the south, maybe 50% is speaking English. And then you will say, well, all my clients are speaking English. Yes, you bet, because you don't meet the other clients who are speaking Italian, Spanish, or French. Do not underestimate that, please. Languages on packagings and all these things come back in the one line. You have to make your strategy and you have to decide, I'm going to the north, like Ryan did. I'm going to Germany. Fine. Okay, it's a big market. 100 million people are speaking the Dutch language, but it has also its disadvantages. So strategy is for me the most important thing to start with, and the biggest threat also, because you cannot work on the European market like a mad bull and doing business everywhere.
Thanks, Victor. Let's go to the audience and see if we've generated any thoughts or questions. On your feet now, folks. All stand. Questions from the audience for the panel, any aspect of CETA? Yes.
Thank you, Rory and panelists. My name is Patricia Diaz, and I run Latin Access. We do certified multilingual translation services. And in the area of labeling, my company is 21 years old. We've done a lot of work with companies of the caliber of Diagnostic Chemicals who exported to many different markets. And with this new agreement, will there be specific regulations that our clients will have to meet in terms of the languages to be utilized for labeling purposes, particularly in the area of the seafood industry and food? Are there some core languages that need to appear on each language, or how does that work?
Thanks, Patricia. Who'd like to take that?
I could make an initial comment on how it is now. With all markets, there are labeling, packaging, et cetera, requirements. It's going to fall back to you on your strategy. If you go with an agent distributor, it could be that the labeling and packaging requirements is in their ball court versus you. So it's going to be on your individual strategy. If you're going to go direct, to a big chain store, yeah, it's going to fall in your ball court.
Ryan, did you have a?
On the initial comments here made by Ryan and Victor, where I come in the fold, if it's a Pacific country and that question came to me, I reach out to my officer in the territory. What is required for your particular market? As you know, EU is 28 countries, but still similar to NAFTA in the US, some is country as a whole, but then sometimes it's by state. I see much the same in the EU, so I will leverage my particular officer in that geographic market for his input to help you make a good informed decision.
A lot of it also depends on the channel you're going through. If you're going through a retail channel, you're likely going to have something that's suitable for that country in the retail environment, so that if it's packaged and it's going to be put on shelves where consumers can see it, there's going to be a lot more specific requirements. for us, when we ship live lobster, basically we have to ship with a label on that meets CFIA Canadian standards, which is approved by the EU. And then sometimes there's individual country requirements. For instance, if we're shipping to France, they want it in French, and they want a few extra details on that label. Versus if we're shipping to Belgium, it's always in English, and it's just a standard, more of a standard label. I think it's just based on language in the area.
Other thoughts on that question? Back to the audience. I can't see the lineup at the mic there yet. Anyone else? Yes, please.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm very interested that Victor's comments on strategies. So my question is, when there is a market that you can't get both the quality and the price, then how you convince customer to buy your product?
Who would like to take that question?
Could you repeat
What?
the question, sorry?
So when there is a market that you can't get both the quality and the price, then how you convince the customer to buy your product? Like if you sell stuff in China, people probably, you're competing with your competitors with the price. But if you sell to Europe, probably people will consider more of quality. So in that case, I just was wondering, exchange some marketing skills in here if you would like to share. When you go to different countries, especially you go to Europe, what they like.
Yep. So is quality or price the biggest driver? And again, maybe you could talk about specific parts of Europe since it's not all one market. So Victor, do you want to...
Languages is one, and if you are going to export into the food service business, like my neighbor is doing, there it's more rational, and as long as you have a good labeling on the packaging, it's fine. But once you're going into the retail, into the supermarkets, especially in the old EU, France, Germany, UK, Spain, Italy, there you must have the Italian language on the packaging. Maybe not by law, because by law any language is accepted in the EU, but your Italian client would like to have the Italian language on the packaging. That's why a lot of exporters start with doing 2 or 3 languages on the packaging. For example, if you take France, Dutch, and English, you're coming quite far, because in Scandinavia people are speaking 100% English. They like to work with English packaging.
I think, I'm not sure we're on the right question. I think her question is, in Europe, is Europe and in general a price-sensitive market or a quality-sensitive market? You really need to emphasize quality,
Okay.
and if the quality is there, can you get the margin you need?
Yes.
Or is this a market that is more lowest cost wins kind of a market? Am I on the right question?
Yeah, I think it's, what Victor says is also a good comments or experience for us to learn that if European, just try to understand what European people like.
Right.
Why they buy from us, not buy from China or India.
Yeah.
So that's something I would like to get some information from Victor, as he is the European people, so he will know when he, as a person to choose, go to the market, what he's looking for.
He has a thick wallet, so that speaks for itself.
Yeah. No,
Victor,
but I cannot answer that question with yes, it is a price-sensitive market, or yes, it is a quality market, because the market is so diverse. It's depending what you can offer. 2 examples. If you want to go to Germany, and a lot of my clients are sending me to Germany because it's a big market, people are driving in big Mercedeses, it's a rich market, but they spend not that money on food. So the percentage of discounters in Germany is almost 40% for all. Yeah? Well, discounters, you know that, they like low prices. So if you want to aim upon this market, yeah, the price is a more important driver than quality. But if you go with your exclusive fish to France or to Italy or to Spain, well, there is quality. So I don't want to say it's a price-sensitive market. Of course, everybody knows in this audience, price is important. But if you talk about fish, I would like to say, price is not coming on the first place. It's logistic, it's how your product is packed, it's the quality, it's the sustainability. Yeah, that's also that we want in Europe. And yeah, then you have to again to talk about different markets. If you allow me, I would like to take the example between France and Germany because they are big markets. And I talk about retail now, supermarkets. What do we see in France? You see that supermarkets are outside the center. The consumer is doing business there once a week with shopping lists. Why? Because in France, man and wife are working 100%. Otherwise, they cannot afford their living. So every Sunday, every Saturday, they go to the supermarket with big trolleys and they buy food with a list. Yeah. They buy French fries, for example. It's a good example because you are here from Prince Edward Island. In France, in the supermarkets, you see 2.5 kilo bags. Yeah? You see big bags everywhere. At home, the French consumer has an enormous big refrigerator to store everything. So you have to be prepared working on that. Talking about French fries also. The French know how to cook. Yeah? So they have a deep oil fryer at home. Yeah, so that is one item for only French fries now. Now I go to Germany, and I will stick to French fries. Why not? Yeah, in Germany you have supermarkets in the center of the town. The consumer is doing the shopping almost every day. In the shop, they decide, I'm going to buy this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to prepare that. Yeah, if you see the packaging for French fries, it's 450 grams. Small packaging. You cannot sell 2.5 kilos in the supermarkets. At home, the German consumer cannot work with a deep fryer on oil because it doesn't have this equipment. So there you have to sell ovenable French fries because he is doing it in the oven. Well, this is one example of just one product, but that's how it works, and that is the problem with not the problem, the challenge with Europe. All different markets, which you have to approach in a complete different way. And that's why I'm aiming upon, and I'm so glad that Ryan also said it, you have to make a choice. What are you going to do? And that's the same with price sensitive or not price sensitive. I can talk about price sensitive markets the whole seminar here. They are there, they are in every country, also in Prince Edward Island. And let's not forget, people like low prices, also the rich people. That's why the rich people also in Europe are buying in the discounters. You see them in the discounters also. So it's a much more differentiated market to answer with yes or no. It's price sensitive. But if you are only having a quality product, you're more than welcome in the European market.
Right.
From our perspective, there's quite a bit of difference just in Europe with lobster. Canadian lobster is considered to be a premium product. Hard shell Canadian lobster sells more than a US lobster, for instance. There's areas of Europe which typically a Canadian lobster, you're not going to find a lot of it because it's a price-sensitive market. And I'm speaking to Spain, Portugal, Italy. The lobster that I sell in Netherlands, in Holland, wouldn't be going to those markets because it's too expensive. It's not what they're looking for. Typically, the logistics are different. When speaking of Europe, shippers from the US, Maine, for instance, just go to Boston and they have a very quick direct flight to Spain, to Italy, and that's where most of the product is coming from that goes into those countries. Now you'd see very little US product in Belgium, for instance, where they're very, very quality conscious on their lobster. Quality is number one there, whereas in Spain, Italy, price is number one, quality is number two. So it is quite different between the various markets. I do sell in France, but only when the US product is in short supply or very poor quality, which is in the summer. So each market is quite a bit different, and the price is important in all markets, but quality is more important when you get into more northern Europe. Now, when speaking about China, for instance, price is always seems to be the most important, but quality is dictated by the transit time. If you sold the same product that would work in Spain to China, you're probably going to have mortality and credit and claim issues because the product's just not suitable for that market and for the transit time. So what you're shipping is actually dictated by how you get there, the logistics. And each market is quite a bit different. Like I said, in Europe, quality #1 in Holland, in Belgium. And then as you go into France, Spain, quality becomes less important and price becomes the dominant factor.
Okay, thank you very much, Ryan. So for you, you have a lot of experience selling stuff to European people. That does sounds like that. Even though we say it's a European country, they seem to have a different taste.
Absolutely, yes.
So my question is, Ryan, from your experience, where we can find those information without have to living in the country to feel what they like? How did you do the marketing when you just started from nowhere? Right now I'm standing here. How I'm going to selling my stuff? Where do I know? Was the Canadian product you said is being considered as a premier? That's probably the one keywords we can catch in this meeting. That's a good thing. Was it challenging and or lessons learned you can share with us? That would be great.
Sure. A lot of it's come through trial and error. If you using the Trade Commissioner service is a very big help. They can let you know who is already doing this, who is importing into Canadian goods already. So that's a start. And like I said, a lot of it's trial and error. If you quote 5 people in France and always you're $2 too high, you got to look at why. You ask questions. Where are you getting your product now? Is it coming from Boston? Is it coming from LaGuardia Airport? So it's just through asking questions and making calls and relying on people like Butch who can, kind of direct you in one area so you're not just throwing darts, so to speak.
Maybe if I could just make one comment. We would like clients before they come to us that you've done your homework. You've done some searching yourself, due diligence, and on our website, www.tradecommissioner.gc.ca, doing business in that country, it's all spelled out there, okay? My experience, I think you're gonna, the market will demand, I think, both a price and quality. The other questions will be, can you make that shipment to me every month on a certain date? There's going to be other questions being asked from you. And the question you're asking here, for me to a client, my question would be, why would a client in Europe buy from you? So before I introduce a client to my person on the ground, I like to hear from the client that he has a comfort level as to why he can be competitive or the client can be competitive in Europe. So that you raise a very good question, and it's also an answer that you need to know before you go over there. And I guess the last comment on that due diligence can be done here while you're here in PEI without spending that $1,000, $2,000, or $5,000 on an airplane ticket. There's a network here in PEI, Trade Team PEI partners, et cetera, to help you with that answer. Thank you.
So could we hear from a couple more companies that are PEI companies that are doing business in Europe now that could talk a bit about that experience to date, as Ryan has, and also what they expect the CETA agreement could unlock for them? That's one question I'll throw out. The other question for the audience is one about investment in infrastructure. So, groups like Innovation PEI, COA, and so on, and other trade organizations are working with companies to help them get ready for increasing their exports. What are your requirements right now? If you're going to do business in Europe, you're going to expand your base of operation. What do agencies here in Prince Edward Island, in Canada, should they be doing to allow your company to access this new opportunity? Anybody in the audience that wants to talk about one or the other or both of those questions? You don't have to talk about the new boat that you're going to buy because of, you know, the increased margins you're going to get. Anybody that wants to speak to those questions? Bernie.
I'm not really going to speak to those questions, but then probably some of those people can answer. I'm Bernie Wood and Associates, and I work with companies in export development and trade. There are 28 countries in the EU, and all of them with different languages, different labeling, different packaging requirements, and so on. And I find, you know, companies will often come to me and say, you know what, I want to export to a certain country. And one of the things that's usually always missing is market research. And I know Victor touched on it when he talked, and so did Butch, but can you talk a bit about the necessity of having a really good market research plan based on the country that you want to export to, and, you know, where you start, who you go to, usually you need some financing and so on. I'd just like you guys to talk a little bit about that.
Who wants to tackle that market research side of things? Victor, do you want to kick it off?
Well, you start with your own products, with your own capacity. And yeah, first you have to line out what do I have, what opportunities do I think I have. And based upon that you have to make choices. Do I go into the retail? That is a very big choice. Mostly the retail market in a country is bigger than the food service market. But when you talk about retail market, you're automatically into the supermarkets, yeah? And if you take my country, the Netherlands, with 5 buyers, maybe 4, yeah, you cover all the retailers. So is your product good enough to convince those buyers that they have to take out the product of your competitor out of the shelf, and that product is running already so much, so nice, with so good logistics, and take over your product? If that is the case, yeah, you have to go to decide to go into retail. When you go into retail, you need much more marketing funds, because you have to promote the product, you have to improve your packaging, you have to go on shows and all these things. But okay, fine, when you're convinced that you can do it, you have to do it. If you don't want to do that, but you still want to go to the retail, you can decide to have a private label. Then your product is packed, and mostly you have to do it yourself, in the label of the supermarkets. All right, 25% of all the products in the retail are private label products. That is a decision you have to take. So that these are 2 decisions. Or you go into the food service. I see for smaller companies much more opportunities in the food service. Why? Because the food service is fragmented. In Italy, for example, there are 700,000 outlets of food service, canteens, restaurants, bars, you name it. And these are all what the Americans call, maybe you do the same, papa, mama companies. They're not part of the chain of McDonald's or Tim Hortons or you name it. They're owned by one person. So you can imagine also the wholesalers who are supplying these papa, mama companies are fragmented. So if you take the area of Milano or Rome or Paris, there are maybe 25 different food service companies you can approach for your product. But then, yeah, because it's not so easy, then you have to go into logistics better, because these companies cannot take a full container of his lobster, so you need an importer. And all these decisions you have to make based upon what you want, how much money you can spend, and also then what type of product, because we can also make the choice north and south. In the north, yeah, food is less important than in the south, and all these things reflects upon your marketing approach, and that makes the European market so challenging, because you have to make a decision what, and this decision has to be based upon information. And one of the things that I always advise companies that are willing to export to Europe, come to one of our trade shows, come to the Cial or the Anuga and look around there, or come to the European Seafood Exhibition in Brussels. There you see all your competitors, you see the product, and when you combine that with several visits to retailers or to food service outlets, then you have a first idea. But to make the strategy is based upon your capabilities, your money behind it, and also, do you want to give exclusivity? Do you want to work with an importer, or do you go direct with all the risks? Are you able to supply delivered Munich? Or do you say, no, you come to me, Mr. Buyer in Munich, and here's the product. First you pay, and then you can take the product. That is nice, but that's only possible for those products which has enormous demand. So, that makes it maybe, compared with China, a more difficult approach to the European market, because it's always the same story. It's so fragmented.
So we're running out of, we're going to run out of time in a moment here, but go ahead.
You raised a good question again, Bernie. And I just wanted to let the audience know that the various federal and provincial departments in Atlantic Canada have not been sitting idle. There's a lot of work happening behind the scenes to position Atlantic Canada to take advantage of the CETA agreement. There's various studies underway by sector, and on that note, maybe I don't want to put Eddie on the spot, but Eddie, do you want to make a few comments on what's going on?
He doesn't have time. Just go to the mic there, Eddie.
Thanks, Butch. I guess, I think the provincial government and ACOA regional offices and ACOA head office. I'm with the ACOA head office. My name is Eddie Rutanga. And we're working together to do a little bit of coordination, a little bit of develop research pieces that would relate to CETA and that will eventually go down and help private companies in our region. So that work is underway. It's like Mr. Pfaff was saying, Europe is a very big market, so we're trying to break down, based on data, try to find best markets for our companies in very specific sectors. So I would say that in the next couple of months, there will probably be more awareness sessions, capacity building activities related to Europe and to prepare companies for what is coming with CETA. But it's, I guess it is related to research and capacity building that we're trying to develop to get more information out there for companies to succeed in that market. So,
yeah, thanks, Eddie. Yeah. One more last burning question, and then I'm going to kind of wrap things up. Yes, sir.
I'm from a marine engineering and a technology company.
Just go a little closer to the mic, please, or pull it down just so everybody can hear you.
I'm from a marine engineering and a technology company, and this is not more towards the export, but looking into the opportunities in terms of with the CETA agreement. One of the things with Peter had also brought up is we have constraint of resources. And Europe had made a great advancement by EU by having the flexibility of having people move within different countries and being able to boost up their economic development. There is a great opportunity. I'm not sure what the agreement phase out where if Canadians will have the access to get European resources here, work together, because that could be one thing, because there are a lot of commonalities in terms of R&D and technology and skill resources.
Thank you. Excellent point. I think we're cutting into some other parts of the agenda here, so we'll kind of bring things to a close. And we have lots of other good questions for this excellent panel, but we'll have to ask you to bring your questions to them individually over the breaks and over lunchtime. I think this has been an excellent panel. big opportunities, obviously in the next number of years, both Europe and with recovering economies internationally. I just add one of the things that would concern me, given the opportunities that seem to be on the horizon, is whether or not our companies are going to be able to access the capital and the human resources they need to expand their base of operation to access these markets successfully. I mean, I think that's a big question for us, and I hope our public policy people in the room are thinking about that, because that's going to be perhaps a bit of a bottleneck in terms of companies' ability to take that. It's a risk. Companies are going to be putting more of their own capital in play, but I think there's going to be other sources required to really enable companies to get after these opportunities and expand our economy here in PEI, and particularly in the higher-end markets, which Europe has. We're not a volume producer here in PEI. We're not a volume competitor. We've got to go after the smaller volume, higher value, higher margin opportunities. That's a particular skill set even doing that. So how do we do that successfully? Use our brand, the Canadian brand, PEI brand, successfully in these markets, both in food and non-food products that we're exporting. So some great advice from the panel. I want to thank all our panelists again for their time this morning, and as I say, encourage you to continue to corner these folks and ask their questions. Some great experience that can help all of our companies export successfully. I want to thank Patty and Sherry for coordinating all of this today. I think hopefully it's been a helpful part of the day to get PEI more ready for the European wave that will be surfing in the future. So thank you very much.